Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first installment of Carey Press's 2023 virtual reading series. At this point, we're up to 26 readings throughout the series, and I'm so honored and happy to be bringing you two authors this evening for a lovely, lovely conversation and a lovely, lovely evening of poetry. I am your marketing and communications director at Carey Press, Dimitri Reyes. And I work closely with our authors and our partnering authors from other places. And I'm honored to be presenting to you this evening the release of Tracy Youngblom's Boy and returning to Elizabeth Weir's When Our World Was Whole, which was published just last year. For those of you who've been following us for a while, our series has shifted. It's a little different now, where we have opened it up to other spaces beyond Carey Press. So although each reading is going to feature a Carey Press poet or fiction writer, or memoirist, it's also going to feature someone from an outside press, an outside publisher. And shout outs to Kelsay Books for publishing When Our World Was Whole by Elizabeth Weir. Let me tell you what the run of the show is going to be this evening. First, we're going to have Liz Weir read. Afterwards, we'll have Tracy Youngblom read from her collection that is just released, Boy, and you could purchase that and this book right now in the chat. And our social media coordinator, Tamara is going to be sure that she puts those links in the chat for you all. And after Elizabeth reads, Tracy's going to read, and afterwards, we'll hold a conversation between me and the two authors where you, the audience members, can also ask questions. So please, throughout the evening, if you want to share praise because you heard something beautiful, something heart-wrenching, something that you just can't get out of your mind, please put that down in the chat. If you have a question for one of these brilliant authors, also please put that down in the chat. Before we begin, I do want to start with a land acknowledgement for Carey Press. As you know, I said my name is Dimitri Reyes of Carey Press, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest in Carey's series of virtual readings celebrating our new forthcoming releases and now other authors. Before the reading begins, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Lenni Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for these indigenous rights. In those rights, additionally, we are joining arts organizations across the country in celebrating Black History Month and in honoring the crucial role of Black authors in the development of American literature and letters and culture. We encourage each of you to support a more equitable and inclusive publishing industry by purchasing their work wherever it is published, not just in February, but always. So now that that land acknowledgement is out of the way, we're going to transition over, and remember, put your beautiful questions and beautiful words of praise in the comments. I'm going to introduce to you now Elizabeth Weir, who grew up in England, where she trained as a nurse and worked in London, Cape Town, South Africa, and in Minneapolis. In the Twin Cities, she wrote for local newspapers, reviewed Twin Cities theater for talkinbroadway.com, and served on her city council, becoming the mayor. She received a Jerome Writer to Writer Award, and her first book of poetry, High on Table Mountain, was nominated for the 2017 Midwest Book Award. Her second book, When Our World Was Whole, now available from Barnes & Nobles, is a collection of 65 accessible poems written from life, including a post-war, English childhood, immigration, a glance at patriarchy, humor, and the wonders and fragility of the natural world. Many journals have published her work, including Comstock Review, Evening Street Review, Gyroscope, North Meridian Review, and Adana. Everyone, please welcome Liz Weir.
So I'm very honored to be included in a Carey reading. And thank you, Dimitri, and thank you, Carey Press. And I'm very honored that Tracy would invite me to read with her. My poems, I'm going to just give a little quote from Carol Ann Duffy, who's the recent Poet Laureate of Britain. She talks about how she finds poetry. You can find poetry in your daily life, your memory, on the bus, in the news, or just what's in your heart. And that's very much how I write. I'm sort of triggered by things I see, things I read, conversations, all sorts of things. So I'll begin with coal delivery. And after the second, I was born into the Second World War near London, and times were very hard afterwards. We had food rationing up through the 1950s. Young people would leave school to get jobs to try and help support their families. This little poem, Coal Delivery. Mother feared that the coal man might deliver us one sack short, and told me to stand in the unheated front room to count all 10 sacks. The slight man climbed aboard his flatbed lorry, stacked a double row of 5 bulging burlap bags along its near edge, jumped down and heaved the first onto his back. He staggered, found his balance, and lugged it through our side gate. I heard the rumble of tipped coal as he poured it into our empty bin. Soon bored, I lost count and practiced handstands against a bare wall. He tapped at our kitchen door to be paid. I'd neglected my job, but ran to join my mum. She counted out careful pounds, shillings, and pence to give him. I saw how stooped he was, yet young, not so much older than me. His clothes, cloth hat, the skin of his face and hands ingrained in coal dust, his back bent beneath the weight of limited possibility. Times were not easy. Just moving forward a bit, it wasn't very easy, in fact, with all my advantages, to emigrate to Minnesota. This poem is called On Being New in Minnesota. Oh, and my youngest brother is a great trout fisherman, and I've often watched him catch trout. On Being New in Minnesota. I don't like how a hooked fish flips and wags, tries to swim foreign air, a creature tugged from its element as I've been from mine. My husband pursues his career in long hospital hours, while our boys and I romp in snow's frozen hold until fierce cold forces us indoors to Lego, books, the newness of television, and Sesame Street. Neighbors leave and return to sealed homes in cars, our road lonely. America's drive for profit intrudes with multiple phone calls, urging me to purchase triple pane windows, a family burial plot, a timeshare in Florida, manly voices addressing me as Beth and Betty, as though we're old chums. Fergus begins preschool, his accent too soon unlike mine. America claims him, vowel by vowel, and I want to reel him in, keep him an apple-cheeked English boy to better hold on to who I am. Torn from context, colors dulling, I sense I'm swimming upstream in the wrong river. It took a little while to adjust. Well, quite a while. And since Ken was a physician, he went to various meetings around the country. He was an academic physician. And I accompanied him once the boys were grown. In New Orleans, I saw a statue that just really touched me. New Orleans bronze. Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne de Bienville stands tall, chin tilted, frock coat lifted in a Louisiana breeze, breeches tied above determined calves. He holds a staff and scroll, lands gained with a fresh thumbprint. Behind, him the honored founder, a priest in sackcloth robe, heavy rosary hanging from his waist, face impassive, his work done. Seated below them both, a Chickasaw chief, features finely cut, deep-set eyes cast down, his people's peace pipe empty in his hand. It saddened me. It was an expressive piece of art. And then that was a little bit of my glance at patriarchy. And then this is just a little bit of fun on the same theme. Apple honored Eve, and Apple refers to the tech company. The company took pilloried Eve's apple, added a pert leaf at its stem, and celebrated her bite into the crisp flesh of knowing. How grateful I am for her initiative in that dreamed garden of the male imagination that created a myth to hold womanhood culpable for mankind's failings. Within that tale, she gave us the ability to analyze and deduce, to grow in thought and to manage the world for our species' advantage. With her original gift, we groomed grasses to fatten and provide grain, invited cattle into care and treachery, harnessed the horse, conceived machines to speed the wheels of commerce, soared to the moon, invented technology to tap the universe, and produced this Apple iBook computer upon which today I doodle. And another light poem, Eclipse at Starbucks. She slight the girl in front of me, the line long, barista slow. He works impassive as a machine. I cannot see her face. From the back, a loose rope of fair hair coils over her collarbone, disappears into the bosom of her sweatshirt. The line shuffles forward. Bored barista eyes engage. She orders, grande cappuccino. Lashes skim mahogany cheeks as he leans towards her, makes her repeat her order. His shoulders broaden, chest puffs, narrow hips taut. He returns her change, fingers lingering in contact. Leaning across the counter, he points to where her coffee will be, perhaps to catch the scent of her. It's my turn. Small latte, decaffeinated. He takes my money, calls next. Coffee in hand, I look to see the face that so awakened him. She's gone. I glimpsed the moon's unlit curve, missed it shining round. The natural world, really, I connect with it. It speaks to me. And our kitchen window looks out onto some woodland. I'm an early riser, and I see some things that just, well, they're amazing. These woods hold silences. Deep in winter woods, a flick of movement, a fox circling the base of a great maple. It rushes the tree, runs at the trunk, and drops back again and again. Fox sits alert, nose pointed upwards, tries once more, gives up, and mooches off. Perhaps there's a meal up the tree, trapped between two perils. My tea too hot to sip. All is still until a grey squirrel scoots down the trunk, dashes over open snow, swoop wide wings, a red-tailed hawk locks the squirrel in dagger talons. Minutes pass, furred tail twitching. Morning tea grows cold. Hawk grips, cold intimacy of death, the double helix of prey and predator intertwined, each designed for the possibility of the other. Hawk lifts into flight, a banner of grey tail streaming behind. Nature, red in claw and tooth. I wrote about the day the pandemic was declared, but I'm going to read a short poem 2 weeks into the lockdown. In a time of contagion, long displaced by human growth, kangaroos explore Sydney suburbs, jackals saunter Tehran's broad avenues, and dolphins frolic in Venetian canals. Residents of Beijing, Shanghai, and Delhi marvel at blue skies, unseen for a generation. In polished nights, Venus gleams bright, and airplane-free skies open to the sounds of swans and geese winging north. Redwings and robins belling peaceful air, the roar of rushing roadways hushed. In a time of hallowed quiet, our damaged planet breathes. We have a big impact on our poor planet. I'll end with this poem. It's a sort of fun poem. It's a sort of literary poem, and I'll leave you to work out who the speaker is. Reading the day book. I stopped to read the messages on the nightstone. Blank this morning. I splash it myself. My man's whistling already. He wants me beside him, but I have work to do, a whole night to decipher. I smell an old fox. He crossed into the woods. I follow his line to the oak tree he marked and make it my own. Another strong lead, deer pellets. I lick down a few and roll in the rest. He's at it again. All right, I'll be there in a minute. Geese on the field, I freeze, ready to chase, but new information distracts my attention. Warm bird, strong and close in the long grass. It's mine if I'm careful. In I dash, it explodes in my face, a pheasant, a flyer, a rotten cheat. Better catch up, don't want to be leashed. Yes, yes. I cock my leg, still he insists. I bounce up to him, smile and wag my tail. I've got to buy time, the page is so rich. We're off again, my nose to the ground. The retriever next door squatted right here. I water her spot to tell others she's mine. Must check out the woodchuck in his hole. I can smell him down there. I'll get him yet. I leave my word at his door and lift up my nose. Bitch on the wind. Can't resist that. Better go to him. He's shouting come, and a whole new chapter. I sit at his feet, I please, when it suits. He's leashed me, the devil. I did what he said, and the storyline was hotting up ever so well. Oh, why am I leashed? Why am I tied to an illiterate man? Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Everyone is giving you praise in the chat when you get a second to get there. It was so great to listen to the cadence of this book that I was telling Liz, everyone, that I was enjoying on a nice exercise bike ride yesterday. And it was such a beautiful read that my half an hour flew by so quickly. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm going to call you back on again near the end of our next session so we can have our conversation. I have some great questions for you. So I'll buzz you out right now, and then we'll bring in Tracy and then Elizabeth will bring you back soon. So Tracy, hello. I'll add you to our spotlight, and I will start by saying it is an honor to be presenting Boy this evening that released just this month, everyone. So if you are interested in purchasing When Our World Was Whole or the release of Boy, that link will be in the chat. Please do support these authors because they're both amazing, amazing authors. Tracy, I'm going to kick it over to you, but not before I read your bio because everyone needs to know about you. Tracy Youngblom earned her MFA in poetry from the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. Previous books include 2 chapbooks, Driving to Heaven and One Bird a Day, and one full-length collection, Growing Big. Her poems and prose have been published in Shenandoah, Wallace Stevens Journal, Big Muddy, DMQ, Cortland Review, St. Catherine Review, Blue Mountain Review, North Dakota Quarterly, and many, many others. She earned a 2017 Pushcart nomination for the poem Even When It Appears, The Truth from Boy. She lives in Minneapolis and teaches English full-time at Anoka Ramsey Community College. Ladies and gentlemen, Tracy Youngblom.
Wow. Well, thank you all so much for coming tonight to this book launch. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. I am really grateful to be here. I'm grateful to see this book in the world and extremely grateful to Kevin Carey Press for several things. First of all, for choosing this book from, I know, many, many fine entries, and for the work that they did as a team to help me get this book through the publication process. I had the wonderful Baron Wormser as a content editor, Joy Arbor as a copy editor, Gabe, who's not here tonight, helped with all the details, and Dimitri and Smata came on at the end with all the marketing and social media help. I just want to blow their horn a little bit more too and point you to the cover of the book, which is just beautiful and was really a sign to me that they deeply understand this book and also managed to respect my wishes as well. So before I read, I am just going to say a couple things about the book itself. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, I think it will help to set some context. The book does tell a story. The landscape of my childhood was pretty rocky. My father was an alcoholic. My parents eventually divorced in March of 1972, which was the month that I turned 9 years old. After that, my mom went to work for the first time outside the home. And in June of that year, my brother, who was the youngest of us and the only boy, died when he fell down the stairs to our basement. A fall that I will say all of my sisters and I also took. So the story of this book is that event, but also the way that it has really reverberated through our lives and largely my life since then. Especially through my own adulthood when I have raised 3 boys of my own. The book is a sequence of poems, which I know is a little bit unusual. That means it's meant to be read in order. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will. The poems that I read, I will go in order so you don't lose the thread of the narrative. The poems are not titled, but numbered. And actually, just a little tidbit, in the earliest versions of these poems, they were all in lowercase letters. There were no capitals whatsoever. I did eventually change that over time. So when I read in a minute, obviously there aren't titles, so I won't read titles and I won't read the numbers. I won't talk much in between, but I will just pause so that you know when one poem ends and the next one begins. So I'm going to begin with a prologue poem, which is the poem that introduces the entire collection. And then I'll just work my way through each section and read 1 or 2 poems from each, hopefully around 10 or 11 poems in total. Okay, so I'm really, again, grateful for your being here at the first public reading of my book, Boy. Imagine a mirror dropped and shattered, a certain beauty in the fragmented mosaic wreckage. It appears arranged, purposeful, artfully confusing. That is illusion. Nothing fits together. There is no surface. just images lifted and hurled against each other. That's how it is with fractured memory, the past. Not to mention the bad luck it is to enter. It's like a crime syndicate. Even casual involvement will cost you your innocence. I didn't break the mirror. I wouldn't choose to rummage. My face is hidden, even from myself. You can cut yourself open or see something that is not there, trying to retrieve or repair. Maybe a cobbled version of that boy's life will appear if I crawl long enough, mustering the faith of the doubtful. When my melon mother finally expelled her guts, it was a son, but she wouldn't believe it. "Don't lie to me," she yelled at the doctor. His bloody body, proof enough to vow. She had everything she wanted now, missing the cosmic joke. She forgot that when God peopled the earth according to his desire, he wasn't satisfied. That's why he tried to kill us off, and why, even when he's not the agent of our deaths, he already is. In 1972, everyone has a finished basement except us. We are behind. We have 2x4 studs, no sheetrock, cement floors, unadorned wooden stairs. Between each set, a patch of open air that we girls glimpsed as we tumbled down. Those spaces, a respite. At the bottom, we stood up, undid our bumps, walked back up, ate dinner as usual, washed dishes afterwards. Afterwards, he was not like us. Doctors said he would never. If they sawed off the top of his head, no. If they did nothing, they did. Other people choosing, moving past us into the future, we were used to that. To get really good at something, you practice. Grandpa and great aunts and uncles in their coffins taught us to mourn until we got it right. Futile crying, heads full of wrong-headed wishes. At my grandpa's funeral, I believed my tears, drawing lines on his made-up cheek, could bring him back. But I was older now. My brother was closed off, his face hidden. In movies, the left behind throw themselves over the caskets, hysterical. Not me. All that practice paid off. Each tear served to the God who thought it up, burying a boy whose coffin was only as long as my arm span. I know your game. I prayed. I've been cheated. His objects are hidden all over the house. Bare in the closet, sealed in plastic. Cowboy hat in my mother's headboard cubby. Plaid shorts and yellow shirt he wore that last Father's Day, stashed somewhere. We have nothing, no money, barely any words. We keep his name to ourselves. But we secretly unwrap that dumb bear to rub our hands over its worn fur. Jesus and Lazarus came back from the dead, and each week we stood at my brother's grave and prayed. The ground never heaved, our feet never moved. Words on the stone were wrought, carved for all time. As we left, we paused at the grave sites of other children buried in his row. Infant daughter Reichert, whose family we didn't know. Many dead babies of the Meisters, whom we did. They lived, each of them, only days. Our brother had lived almost 4 years. How lucky we should have felt. September came with its flagrant announcement of destruction, flamboyant death clothes. We returned to school. Cool air bit our bare knees, tossed our hair into frenzies. Fourth grade was here, where math turned suddenly incomprehensible. I knew that everyone knew I was -1, banked on their embarrassment. Who would ever ask, how are you now that your only brother is dead? To ward off even silent pity, my chin would rise to ridiculous heights. I'm fine. Distant, smiling. They could look at me and never see anything resembling the truth. This is how to bear losing boys. Lock what is left in memory. Tell everyone who asks, I have 2 sisters. I have no father. Walk with your eyes cast forward in utter confidence until they say you walk like a man. Consort only with the literal. I'll be there means in the flesh. Expect it. Doubt it. Believe that wanting can be as good as having always fraught with uncertainty. Pray with your eyes open, alert to nuances of visitation, and greet them not with hope, but suspicion. Lost my place. So many ways to fall. Carrying the laundry basket, step, slip, thump on the butt, how I fell 8 months along. Or the forward lurch, one heel snagged in the hem of a Christmas dress, clothes and shoes flung outward, pregnancy preceding me by half a step. 2 out of 3 times it happened. No harm to either boy, but the abrading of hope, waiting to feel movement. The stories repeated long afterwards, so the endings couldn't suddenly change. They will devour the centers of slices of bread and bologna, cast the hollowed circles to the linoleum, and you will let them. They will grab handfuls of dirt from plants and scatter it, refuse to pick up toys or sit close to you when you read, and you will let them. They will write on the walls, and later will write papers that will make you sick at their indifference and laugh when you try to help. And what choice do you have but to let them? They will get jobs because you cheer them on, even buy them a car so they can leave you more efficiently. They will tell you, it's your fault I'm not doing my homework. We'll stop reading anything. They will make you the butt of jokes you don't understand. They will buy you nothing for Mother's Day, and you will always let them. I'm just going to say one thing, one quick thing. I'm nearing the end. Interspersed in this book, in the poems that are directly about the experience, are some poems that I think of as little breather poems that are not directly about my brother's death or the aftermath of that, but about sort of related subjects. And I quite deliberately structured the book that way. So just that's my little introduction to this poem, which is suggestive, but not directly about the experience. Suppose the carrots I tug to air, beets that resist surfacing, do not just send showers of dirt upward into wide sunlight. Suppose their abrupt unearthing unleashes cries of such pitch the human ear cannot detect them. So just two more poems. Not a field, a garden. Late October light. The last melons, too young to pick at frost, gone to mush and seeds. Vines dry as raffia. I fill the wheelbarrow with fodder for compost, but I can't shake the garden's hold. My hands tacky with sour juice and seeds. Dirt packed under my nails so tightly it will take days. Weeds that thrive this late are dug in. Their roots, sequestered by earth, will become earth. Next year, I will not have to remember what I planted here. It will all return. If I don't want melons, I should bury this ground under a foot of leaves, tamp them down, prevent such visitation. And the last poem that I'm going to read tonight is the last poem in the book. I am still surrounded by boys, now men. Such a relief, my comfort. We make a circle in our complicated devotion, not unlike the moon, snagged in the branches of my shaggy pine. I step outside to admire. Such luminous girth. It floats, weighty, translucent, beautiful, so low I could almost, but that would ruin the awe that escapes in its simplest form, a single expelled breath. Oh, testament to what I love, but can never touch.
Tracy, my goodness. My gosh, Tracy, that was gorgeous. I appreciate you so much for giving us the treat of this reading this evening. And I could really feel you on those pages. And, you know, that's what we look for when we're looking for things that Cavan carry, right? That psychological and emotional landscape of everyday life that we talk about with what Cavan carry is all about. And, you know, you both are a testament to that. So I appreciate that greatly. So ladies and gentlemen, this is Tracy Youngblom, amazing, amazing poet with Elizabeth Weir. And now we're transitioning over to our Q&A portion of the reading. And Tamara, I'm going to tell you again to mention these two lovely, lovely books that are available this evening, both from Cavan Carey Press and Barnes and Nobles. I'm going to start this part of the Q&A, and anyone that comes to these readings know I'm going to start first because I've been chomping at the bit waiting for a question. And just listening here and sitting down, I was thinking, Tracy, no matter what your poems that you decide to share, you kind of still get the heart and the speaker that Phyllis, someone in the chat, mentioned that was hypnotizing us. And then Liz, we mentioned like your poems have such a great levity to them, and it was a treat to hear what you decided to read tonight as I sat with some of your work. So as the poet, to give our audiences a deeper look into the process of putting a book together, maybe can you both talk a little bit about when you felt like your book was ready to start shopping it around for publication? What made it ready? What constitutes as ready? Is it ever ready? Right? These are questions that I think we always think about. So who'd like to go first?
Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
Well, my process was, I think I started with 85 poems.
Oh, wow.
And knew I had to cut it back. And actually, I asked Tracy, was one of my readers, to guide me and help me with that. I think I asked 3 friends, and that was very helpful. And then I really sort of sat down and got real and selected the poems. My poems are very accessible. And I think the heart of my book is actually the final part that I didn't read much from, which are the natural poems. But I wanted to have more variety than that. Yes, I forced myself to have no more than 65 poems. And being that selective helped to improve the manuscript. It could have been better still, I know, but it was enough to please Kelsay Press, for which I'm grateful.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that question, because it's the story of this book is something I think about often. I wrote the first poems for this in the fall of 2013, only because I enjoy reading books of poems that all kind of pick away at the same subject matter from different angles. But I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure if I remembered enough, had enough memories, or could process enough to come up with a poem. So I just kept this file on my computer, and after about 3 years, I said to myself, if I can get to 50 poems, if I can write 50 poems, then maybe this could be a book. And I wrote more than that, some more than that. I'm not quite sure how many more. So it was at that point where I went on a little writing retreat and took everything I had and started working with putting it in order. So I guess 2 things. Once I wrote enough, and then once I put it in an order and then had some people read it and they said, okay, that makes sense. Then I felt like maybe it was ready to be called a book.
Excellent. It's curious, and thank you for that, Tracy, because it's kind of always a feeling thing, right? When it starts feeling good and it starts feeling like a manuscript. I mean, of course, both of you also mentioned kind of like a page number or a poem number, right? And then you kind of start snipping away at those corners to create this lovely hedge that's going to end up becoming a book at some point. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. And we got another question here from Paige, and this is to Tracy. It's hard sharing such personal, difficult experiences. What advice do you give to emerging poets and students about preparing for a reading when their work is emotional and they're going to read it in front of an audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Paige. To tell you the truth, I literally didn't know how it was going to go tonight. I thought there's a pretty good chance I could crack up, and I felt it coming a little bit, but I just tried to read a little bit louder. I think honestly, very practical work. If you're reading work that's super emotional, practice. Practice until you're reading it, but you're not reading it for the first time. Yeah. Sometimes if you come across even something you've written and I read it again, I think, oh my, I remember what it felt like when I wrote that. So I think practice and take deep breaths. And honestly, I never minded when people cry when they read. So yeah, if I had broken down, I would have felt like that's okay. It is very personal.
Yeah, it's a part of that emotional release that we get from this, right? And yeah, I think there is some sort of vibrational energy with reading it out loud and practicing it, right? there's something on a subconscious level when you're just reading it in silence, or you're getting the manuscript prepared and you're revising it because you're thinking of the nuts and bolts of those things, right? But then when you're actually orating this poem and you're saying it out loud, it almost feels physical at that point.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
had some interesting conversations in the past week with some family, my youngest son and daughter-in-law and my husband, who each said when they were reading it, they cried a few times reading poems. And that was really, I mean, okay, I'm not happy that people cried, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's important to me that the message is getting out, right, to other
Yeah.
people.
Excellent. And you know what, Liz, I'd like to throw you in this conversation too. Have you written some work that perhaps is a bit harder to read out in public, whether it's for a subversive reason that the author knows about behind the speaker, or something that's kind of like maybe a bit more touchy, maybe like some of the COVID poems, for instance, or things such as that?
My first book, I dealt with family more,
Mhm.
and my mum's long and slow decline, and I was very close to her. And I flew home and missed my father's death, but I could be in England for his cremation service. And reading those poems
Mm.
at readings, I would crack. I mean, my voice, I'd have to stop, take a deep breath, and begin again. And as Tracy says, the practice, you think you're ready, you think you can go through this, but it fills your chest, and each time it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard. I still can't read those poems without feeling them deeply. So yes.
Right. And I feel like there's a certain magic to the work too, right? I think depending on what our moods are like, what we've went through that day or that week, we come to a poem like a different person each time. So we kind of never know when those emotions are going to sneak up on us. And thinking about that, Tamara, our lovely social media coordinator in the chat, also mentioned this question. So thinking in that conversation of this hard work, how do we grapple with writing about these harder subjects? Some that can be enumerated by words, but yet as we poets, we're always trying to write towards. So those poems about family and childhood and loss, maybe being in strange places, like immigrating and moving, right? How are we able to write about these subjects that might feel tougher to come to the page about? This is for both of you.
Tracy, yours is more
Well,
emotional.
you know, I think how I managed it with this group of poems was I just wrote them bit by bit, and like I said, I didn't think enough memories. And so I would just sit down if I remembered something, and I would say, oh, let me just see, how this is going to be as a poem. But I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I think you just have to give it a go. I mean, I think getting it down on page, and that what I read tonight wasn't the first versions of these poems. I mean, later I revised them and tidied them up. I mean, just being able to let it all gush out was the way that I approached it. And then I thought, well, if I get to work on these some more, I'll rein some of this in. And I will just say one more thing. I mean, I mentioned the breather poems, and there's a series of poems that reflect different phases of the moons and so on. And so I actually did a little research and looked up, you can look up anything now, the state of the moon, for instance, on the night my brother was born. And so that helped me have a little focus that made it seem, not that it wasn't personal, but, oh, I'm going to start with the moon, right? That's not really all that personal. So I found that little image to kind of help me process some of it.
And with my, there's a little sequence around leaving England, leaving family. And one poem just felt so raw. It felt like red meat. I didn't include it. It was angry and it was fierce. And I mean, maybe it should have been in there, but I did not include that one.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we sometimes make these choices, right? to like, as you said, the trimming away of including some poems and not including some poems, and the rawness that you said, it felt like red meat, right? So visceral. Um, do you feel like perhaps that the poem felt so raw that it needs to be even thought about further? Or do you feel like it was just
It would be an interesting poem to return to. And of course, I'm aware too of the effect my words will have on family members, close people. And that was necessary with this poem. I mean, I might go back to it and look at it again and rework it. The emotion was fierce and real, but yeah, there could be hurt there that I chose not to share.
Yeah, you know, a couple of things from that. The fact that one, poets have a social responsibility when they're putting work out, right? Not only for the random readers that are going to read, but also for those personal people that are going to come into contact with us. Like Tracy, you mentioned the sharing that book with family and your family having an emotional reaction to it. It brings me back to that quote from the poet I, that poetry is an art and not a martial art. And we have to be very aware of those words and how we navigate space and how we use these words. This is beautiful. And speaking of those words, this question is from Annie Kim, also for you both. You both tell stories in your poems, which Annie Kim loves. She's wondering whether these are stories that feel that they need to be told as poems rather than in prose, or if you tend to write about these subjects in either form.
I towards the end of my book, I do really delve into the damage that our species is doing to our planet, our beautiful planet that knows how to work by itself and sustain itself, and our huge interference and damage, I mean, towards a frightening end, in fact. And I don't go deeply into that. I'd like to delve into that more in my work. What was the question again? Oh, sorry. What was her question again?
Yeah, so does you're both telling narratives in your
Yes.
work. Does it manifest as a poem or does it manifest as a story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Often if it doesn't fall naturally into lines and rhythm, I'll write it out in prose. And I have one prose poem in this book. But I love the punch of poetry, the intensity of it. So I like to, if I do resort to prose, I'll often then cherry pick that to bring it down to that intensity of a poem.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think because most of what I'm writing about in this book happened a long time ago, I had enough space from it that poetry seemed like a good form. I mean, it's not that it wasn't emotional because it was, because it brings things back into the forefront when you write about them. But I maybe there's another part of this that I can't really answer, because honestly, though I've written about this event in my life and my brother's death all my life, I have never tried to write an essay about it, not one time. And I don't know, maybe if I try to explain it too much, I feel like I'll be at a loss for words. I don't feel like there's a way to explain it. I can just sort of explore the emotions and the images that it leaves behind. But I will say this, in about 8 years ago now, my youngest son was in a very serious car accident and almost died. And after that, I wrote 0 poems for like 6 months, 0. And when I started writing again, I wrote prose. And I have what is now a memoir manuscript about that. And so I don't know, for me, maybe just closeness or proximity. But I'm going to be honest, when my son, who actually did almost die, when that happened, I suddenly was like thinking of my brother in a parallel situation and what it must have been like for my mom to lose a child. that maybe I shied away from poetry because I was working on this book at that time and went more to prose, where I can do sentences, I can do paragraphs. That seems much easier for me to process.
Yeah, density is an interesting question when we think about prose or poetry, because both of them could be dense in different ways, right? Like Phyllis in the chat mentioned to our responses that less could sometimes be more. And it's interesting because sometimes prose could just feel very verbose if we're trying to talk about a subject, and you can really hone in on some sort of like spiritual or just intangible element through a poem, right? And this is a question from Kath that leads to that for Tracy. How do you think the form of your poems, short lines, short stanzas, work to help you articulate your material?
Hi, Kath. Thanks for the question. It absolutely helped when I started writing these poems. I know in draft, the form of a draft doesn't always remain the form, when you start working on poems, but even the earliest versions of these poems were like that, very short lines, very short couplets, where I felt like I could stay really spare and can kind of control maybe what I was writing a little bit. And like I said, in the first versions, I had 0 capital letters. Everything was lowercase. And that felt really important to me at the time. Just like I don't know, sort of stepping in the background and just seeing what I can remember and get down on paper about this. And that also was useful to me. I feel like if I had been the capital I at the beginning, I wouldn't have been able to write all these poems.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, it just sometimes some things just feel right also. And other times we don't really know why, right? You just want to do some sort of method in a poem, and it just works. And you could just be swayed for the poem, or the poem is speaking to you in a certain way. This message is from Andy Penner. Did research play a part in any of your writing for the two of you, either for this book or any other work throughout your history?
Not a lot from mine. I tend to write from my life and experience, observations. It'd be interesting to have a focus subject and do research. It might be something I should look at for a coming book.
Yeah, actually, I did do a little bit for this book. I already talked a little bit about it. When I first started writing about it, and for some reason, I started thinking about the moon. I looked up a bunch of different significant dates and what the moon phase was at that time. I mean, that's kind of minor research. But then I didn't read this part of the book tonight, but there's one poem in the collection that actually has a title. And it's a poem in 5 sections, and that came much later. And somehow I stumbled upon this weirdly article about Aristotle's notions of time and space, which is not in my wheelhouse, and started reading it and just felt like, oh my God, this is exactly what I'm trying to write about in some of these poems. And so I read that article and did the best I could understanding the concepts, and then took some of those as epigraphs for this poem in sections, which is called Aristotle Said. It's a kind of a response to that. And that happened accidentally, but maybe nothing's an accident. I don't know. I mean, I stumbled upon it at the right time, and it just gave me just another sort of angle, more metaphysical, maybe angle to look at what I was trying to write about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I wasn't aware of that. I love asking these questions and having these conversations because you wouldn't know about these different meanderings in the book unless you asked. That's great. So I see that some folks are starting to head out. It's either dinner time for some, or it's late on the East Coast for others. We do have 3 questions left. I just want to make sure we get through everything. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening and listening to our reading. This question, and I hope she's still here, Tracy, from your pressmate, Diane Silvestri. She asked for both authors. Have either of you found that another event or object of interest develops into a metaphor that opens a new poetic tour of your emotional event? So let me try to paraphrase this. Have any of you found an event or object that develops some sort of interest for you, and you start writing it in a metaphor, and it just opens up the gate for a whole new other project? Has that happened to either of you before?
A whole other project. I mean, my little poem, my first poem about the pandemic, again from my kitchen window, I watched a red-tailed hawk fly from a tree and sort of look awkward on the grass, didn't sort of slightly abnormal behavior. And then it hopped up and landed on something, and it was a snake, and it flew to a tree and began to devour the snake. And I didn't know, I just observed it. But when I began to write, it seemed to be a metaphor for the pandemic. There we were, feeling spring, everything was beginning to open up, comfortable, and then suddenly complete horror. So that was a metaphorical poem, but it didn't, I haven't had a metaphor to trigger a whole manuscript. That would be a gift.
It would. Thank you for sharing that. Tracy?
Well, I can answer that question in a couple of ways. At first, I thought Diane's question was related to the books that we read from tonight, but maybe that is not what she meant.
Well,
but
she's shaking her head yes, so I was wrong. So you're right, Tracy.
So I mean, that's kind of how the moon worked for me in this book. And also there are a number of poems about gardening, which I read a couple of them. And an earlier poem in the book is because a small event that I remember from my childhood was that my brother got lost once he was like 2 years old, and we all were like searching for him. And so the idea of a field or whatever comes in to that. So that help that metaphor of, you know, a field, a garden, the cycles of life and death, and what blooms and doesn't, and so on, did help me to get at some of this material. And also, you know, I'm a big fan of the elegy. I always have been. And I suppose this book is one long elegy. And I know that in the formal elegies, there's all kinds of natural images. And also, interestingly, images of like sewing and sewing like with a needle and thread, sewing, weaving. Those are often images that come up in elegies. I don't think I have any of those in this book, but I have made use of those metaphors before, like as a way to get a hold on something that you're trying to express that's hard to express.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for bypassing my incorrect interpretation, Tracy, to Diane Silvestri's positive head nod in the side audience widget. Thank you. Okay, cool. So last two questions, y'all. Thank you all for hanging out with us for such a long time. This first of the last two questions, what are your writing practices? Do you have any schedules or rituals the two of you are committed to when you're writing?
Well, I certainly like to write in the morning. Sometimes if when I've written something and I don't know where it's going, and often I don't know where it's going, as I wake up in that sort of half state between sleep and waking, things sort of fall into place. I don't know, it's not the subconscious, but there's something close to that. And sometimes there are sort of answers there that just guide the poem. And I like to make my first cup of tea, and the house is quiet, and I'm in the kitchen all by myself, and I have a little book I write in by pencil. And sometimes a poem will begin to find direction and know where it's going. I don't have a regular practice. I'm not disciplined. I don't sit down every morning and write. But when I begin to feel a poem, I get quite excited and just can't wait to go and work on it and find out just what is being said and where it's going.
That's wonderful. It's nice to know that your muse is also an early riser. That's
right?
Excellent.
You and Flannery O'Connor. You know, I teach full time, and that takes a lot of energy, creative energy too. So I'm just going to confess, I don't really have a regular writing practice. You don't want to learn discipline from me. Although in general, I'm a very disciplined person, like super organized and disciplined. But about writing, it's always more that if I have a project, you know, something that I'm working on, then I want to do it. You know, if I run out of ideas, or I'm not currently don't have an idea, it's much harder for me to want to write. So over the years, like I've had various friends who we've traded assignments with each other. Oh, here's the theme for the month. Oh, perfect. Now I know. Now I have some direction to go.
Vision.
The book was a project. I have another group of poems that I'm going to turn to next that I think will be a project. But I'm so interested in morning people because I'm literally not a morning person. I am because you have to get up and teach at 8 a.m. or whatever, but I've never tried writing in the morning. I don't even walk to the mailbox in the morning. I'm just kind of a slow waker upper and get going as the day goes. So I mostly write at night.
Listen, Tracy, you know who you are. You know who you are, Tracy. That's perfect. Yeah. It's always a cool consensus to ask because there's those that have a strict schedule and those that kind of just get it when they can get it, right? They do it when they can. And it's important to know. And we also go through flows, right? Ebb and flows. Like there's going to be times where we're going to write like crazy and other times where there's gonna be a bit of a dry spell. Very nice. All right, last question. I know both of you are in the same writing group. I learned that earlier this evening. And you've been in a writing group together for quite some time. So how important, because this is Cavan Carey's mainstay, right? There's the fine arts, quality literature, but then the community aspect like this, just poets talking to each other. So how important is it to have a community of writers to work with throughout your processes?
It's vital, absolutely essential. I have two poetry groups. One is in need of revitalization, and we're going to look at that. But you don't really know until somebody else puts their eyes on your work, where the flaws are, where it needs strengthening, what is working, what is good and strong in it. I liken it to a really good detergent, having your poems sort of washed and coming out cleaner. And yes, no, it's vital to me.
Oh my gosh.
Tracy, you teach.
I don't think I would do anything if I didn't have other writers who meet either formally or informally, because I gotta know what people are doing. Even knowing what other people are doing helps me to be, oh yeah, that's right. I'm working on this thing. I want to keep working on it. And reading other people's work and learning how to be a good reader has been like the best part of my writing life ever. You don't maybe realize that it's happening when you're just in a workshop setting, but it's a way to give back to other writers, right? People in your community, to give them feedback. But what you absorb from being able to do that certainly does translate to your own work as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you both ladies so much for this lovely, lovely evening of words and more words. Everyone that's still here, these two books are still available on Barnes & Nobles and the Cavan Carey Press website. If you order Boy from Cavan Carey Press, we could ship this bad boy to you within a day. So definitely consider that. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I guess our final quote of the evening, and Liz, we're definitely going to cut you a check for this. Tamada, we need to get this on a t-shirt. Poetry groups, they're like good detergent. I think that's a good way to end this workshop. Poetry groups, they're like good detergent. At this point in time, I am going to stop our recording, but before I stop our recording, I will ask everyone to unmute, to come and say good night and offer your praise to our readers for the evening. Bravo! Brava!
Thank you. Thank you.
Some job.